Came back, the losses were around $4 billion.
A live-action remake, whatever you want to call it at this point, it already is going to be considered a box office disaster. Even Disney themselves are actually projecting this out to be a box office failure on their part, and they all saw this coming because, look, we already know that the budget for this film is absolutely ridiculous. We're talking about hundreds upon hundreds of millions of dollars when it comes to Snow White, on top of marketing funds that are actually being poured into this movie.
Instead, Disney has opted for a handful of tightly controlled press events with limited media access and restrictions on questions posed to its lead actress, Rachel Zegler.
Today, we've got a gigantic pot of Disney tea, and trust me, it's piping hot.
What's interesting about Snow White is that after the UK premiere was cancelled, that was by far the biggest signal that Disney is in pure panic mode at this point when it comes to the critics, when it comes to the bad press, as well as when it comes to those that are very vocal and really speaking their mind and really throwing their opinion out there about this movie.
We're diving into what's shaking behind the scenes of Disney's live-action Snow White remake, starring Rachel Zegler as the iconic princess and Gal Gadot as the evil queen. This film was supposed to be a fairy tale dream come true, but it looks like the only thing magical about it right now is how quickly it's turning into a PR nightmare.
Every time she opens her mouth, it's crisis mode when it comes to Disney, having to backtrack. She talks about how this isn't a fairy tale about falling in love with the prince. This is a fairy tale about fighting your own battle.
From personal feuds to political landmines, plus some seriously questionable marketing tactics, Disney has landed in a situation they never anticipated. Buckle up, friends, this is going to be a wild ride. Let's start with the big question on everyone's mind. Is there really a feud between Rachel Zegler and Gal Gadot?
It is, and it's really mean to put her next to Gal Gadot, who's absolutely stunning.
Yeah.
So,
it's not fair. We argued about that.
Multiple sources say yes. They're claiming the tension was so thick on set you could practically carve it with the magic mirror. Apparently, these two powerhouses had very little in common from day one, starting with their age gap. Rachel is in her early 20s and Gal is well into her 30s. Age shouldn't matter, right? Except when you combine it with a huge divide in political beliefs, especially in hot-button areas like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
The live-action Snow White adaptation is going to be a major disaster for Disney, and it seems that they finally come to that conclusion because they're scaling back the Snow White Hollywood premiere. We know that they have completely canceled the UK one, and now she is being savaged on social media and compared to Lord Farquaad.
The word on the street is that Rachel and Gal have each publicly supported different sides of that conflict. You can imagine how that might lead to some frosty vibes during coffee breaks. Now, nobody's expecting them to be besties who do matching TikTok dances, but Disney probably hoped they could, at the very least, keep it professional long enough to get through the press tour.
Ruin it like every other franchise they've touched. Now, for Disney, as you probably remember, all of this publicity, the Zegler interviews, the Daily Mail leak, caused a lot of unexpected, for them anyway, pre-production problems. People weren't supposed to see and understand just how unwatchable the new Snow White was going to be. It was supposed to be, kind of a surprise, but now there was no hiding. They came under fire from pretty much everyone.
And that's exactly where things really got messy. Despite early buzz that this adaptation might be a total success, considering Disney has a track record of these big remakes, the hype went downhill once Rachel Zegler started talking. And talk she did a lot. Now, Rachel faced a barrage of criticism the minute she was announced as Snow White. We saw something similar happen with Halle Bailey as Ariel in The Little Mermaid. There's always a certain section of the internet that reacts negatively to a person of color being cast in a traditionally white Disney role. But Rachel poured gasoline on the fire when she addressed the hate in a not-so-tactful way. She basically told her critics, "No, I'm not bleaching my skin. Get over it." While her defenders applauded her boldness, others slammed it as a combative approach that only fueled more backlash. Then came a series of interviews where she labeled the original 1937 Snow White storyline as weird, implied the prince was a stalker, and said the new movie was ditching the concept of a true love's kiss.
It's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White that is
saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about
she's gonna die.
true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can.
If you're a die-hard fan of the classic Disney princess lore, you can see how that might sound like ultimate disrespect. Instead of praising what came before, she tore it down, basically calling it outdated, regressive, and even a little creepy. Folks started asking, does she even like the original Snow White at all? Or is she just here for a paycheck? the alleged drama with Gal Gadot didn't end at the set wrap. Insiders say the friction spilled over onto red carpets and promo events. Gal would show up at Disneyland alone, while Rachel popped up at a private screening in Spain without her co-star. But their distant appearances weren't the only thing fueling the rumor mill. Sources claimed Gal enjoyed filming and had no personal problem with Rachel, but also made it crystal clear they aren't exactly swapping BFF bracelets. Gal apparently likes to keep a tight lid on controversies, especially those that can ruin a film's reputation. With the chatter about their opposing stances on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict simmering in the background, branding experts warned that open disagreements could trigger mass boycotts. Disney wants none of that. They've already been dealing with enough negativity from conservative fans who bristle at any perceived wokeness. At this point, the conversations become less about Snow White and more about who can outflame each other on social media. Not exactly the Disney fairy tale marketing campaign you'd expect, is it? There's a running joke that in the new movie, the prince is basically non-existent. Rachel's comments about how this version won't focus on a love story, and how the prince in the 1937 film was, in her words, a stalker, became her signature talking point. She repeated it so often that fans started feeling like the original was being unjustly trashed. People wondered why Disney would even call this adaptation Snow White if it's undergoing such massive changes. Why not just make a brand new story about a fierce princess who doesn't need a prince, you know? Because if you're going to throw out the central romance, the iconic kiss, and the classical elements that made Snow White a classic, what's the draw for nostalgic viewers who grew up loving that storyline? That's how you end up with the dreaded W word, woke. Suddenly, the movie's being labeled as a typical example of Hollywood going too far in rewriting its own history. Rachel Zegler found herself at the center of that storm. A cluster of older press clips added more fuel to the fire. In one, Rachel casually admitted she had only seen the animated classic once and never liked it. She found it scary and never revisited it until she got the role. Some fans felt that was a huge red flag. If you don't appreciate a beloved film, or at least treat it with some reverence, why sign on to remake it? Now, there are plenty of actors who have come into big roles without being lifelong fans, but they usually do a bit of damage control to show respect for the legacy they're stepping into. For many watchers, Rachel came off flippant, which only aggravated critics who already found her stance condescending. Didn't help that promotional events seemed to highlight how awkward things had become. Rachel attended one private premiere in Europe, while Gal was at Disneyland in California, looking all regal in her evil queen glam but with no Snow White in sight. When they did appear together for a press event in Los Angeles, they barely stood next to each other for photos. Fans analyzed every group shot, searching for any sign of forced smiles or stony expressions. If you read a little too much into it, you might swear you saw cartoonish lightning bolts between them. Of course, no Snow White story is complete without the Seven Dwarfs, or so you'd think. But for the live-action film, Disney opted to replace 6 of the dwarfs with a group of magical creatures of various heights, genders, and races, leaving only one dwarf in the mix. This change ignited a debate in the dwarfism community. Some felt that removing those roles was erasure, a direct response to Peter Dinklage, who previously criticized the portrayal of the dwarfs as stereotypical. Others believed Disney should have kept the characters and simply updated their storyline if necessary, rather than cut them out entirely. The entire situation turned into a PR fiasco, with many questioning Disney's decision and accusing them of going half-in on inclusivity without actually benefiting real-life actors who would have loved those roles. Meanwhile, online, the negativity reached a fever pitch. Some fans declared they would boycott the movie outright. Others hammered away at Rachel's persona, declaring her the most disliked actress in the world at the moment. An extreme take, but you know how the internet can be. The official trailer for Snow White even set records for being one of the most disliked Disney trailers on YouTube, eclipsing typical outrages. Much of that vitriol was directed at Rachel, who critics say single-handedly tanked the film before it even hit theaters. A bit harsh? Perhaps. But that's the territory we're in. Realizing just how bad things had gotten, Rachel tried to smooth things over, issuing a public apology for a political post she had shared on Instagram. She mentioned letting her emotions get the best of her and that everyone has a right to their own opinion. While it's a start, fans remain divided. Some believe it was a genuine attempt at making peace. Others see it as strategic damage control, especially since Disney needs this film to at least break even. Brand experts say that Rachel's approach in interviews might be a prime example of a celebrity not being fully PR trained. She's young, outspoken, and might not have realized that bashing the original movie or doubling down on controversies would feed the internet's outrage machine. Gal, on the other hand, has mostly skirted around the drama. She's been polite, calm, and tight-lipped, which has only made the rumors of a feud more believable to some people. If Gal's not publicly praising her co-star, that's enough for fans to read into it, even though it could simply be that she's trying to avoid stepping on landmines. With all of this drama swirling around, is the Snow White remake doomed before it even premieres? Possibly. There's a large chunk of the Disney fan base that's already turned against it, not just for recasting or woke arguments, but because the entire marketing push feels like it's overshadowed by negativity. Disney's got to be squirming in their seats. They spent big bucks on star power, Gal Gadot alone is a major name, and they pinned high hopes on Rachel after she burst onto the scene in West Side Story. This was supposed to be a glittering highlight in the wave of live-action remakes. Instead, it's become a daily source of drama on celebrity blogs and TikTok accounts. The show could still go on. Sometimes controversy draws a crowd. But if the online chatter holds any weight, Snow White is starting to look more like a cautionary tale than a feel-good classic. That's all we've got for now on this Snow White swirl of drama. If you liked what you heard, or you just love all the shocking twists and turns in Hollywood, make sure to smash that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join our ever-expanding family of celebrity news junkies. Trust me, you won't want to miss the next batch of controversies that land on our doorstep. Till then, thanks for tuning in, and remember, sometimes the fairest of them all is just the one with the best spin.